It's one of our few of interest. If your hair is combed, you feel ready for anything. Do you want to comb mine?
No, it's hopeless. Just so it isn't, sticking
your hair's
completely
good
up.
Because the fuller it is,
I just want to
Sort of gets insanely wild sometimes.
that CBS drawer, the artist, the man,
which one?
is quite good. The man, the sort of small
We're
man.
actually rolling here, so
You are?
Okay.
somewhat serious.
Let's get started.
Okay.
Dive in.
Okay, well, I'm ready. You want me to go? Okay. Well, you didn't get a chance to make the defense of justification in court, and I'm sure a lot of people wonder why a mother with 3 children would risk many years, perhaps many months in jail. Could you explain what kind of justification you could have had for this action?
Mother of 6 children, that is.
Children. Well, anybody, but particularly, I think, a mother of 6 children.
Well, the legal justification we attempted to introduce and didn't have much success was the idea that we were trying to prevent a greater evil, a very immediate evil. The judge didn't seem to think that the danger was imminent, but he didn't allow us to present evidence that indeed it is imminent, and that he also discounted whether there were other options besides what we did, and I think we could have certainly talked about all the other things that we've been doing over the years, and coupled with the imminence of the threat, we felt that this was a necessary action, and I think we might have convinced a jury, or at least some of the jurors, of that.
Can you explain what kind of evidence you wanted to present that you weren't allowed to?
Well, we had Robert Aldridge on mind first, and he is a nuclear arms expert, having designed many of these over the course of 16 years. And the fact that the Mark 12A is a first strike weapon, I think, was our first major concern. The fact that it is part of the 1980s nuclear weapons buildup that is extraordinarily more dangerous, causes nuclear war to be that much closer, simply because of the technology, simply because of the fact that the Soviet Union and the United States will have a first strike capability, or what is thought of as a first strike capability.
That might be a good thing to explain, because I noticed that the judge seemed to think that was an opinion like any other, that these were first strike weapons.
Yeah, well, the point of the Mark 12A is that it's so fantastically accurate. If you're talking about a deterrence weapon, you're not talking about something that necessarily has to be accurate, because the idea of deterrence is you're threatening to destroy another nation's population, a city. It doesn't matter if you're, a quarter of a mile off even. So when you're getting to the point of being extremely accurate within a few hundred yards, you're talking about a different level of attack. You're talking about attacking nuclear missiles in their silos, in hardened concrete silos, and you require accuracy for that. Now, the whole point of attacking missiles in silos would be for a first strike. I think the idea is an extraordinary idea, because even in a first strike that's totally successful, there's a great unlikelihood that any nation could emerge victorious, simply because of the vast amount of radiation and the vast amount of damage to the ozone layer that would be caused by the amount of nuclear weapons that would be required to destroy the other side's nuclear capabilities to any degree.
You said that the judge also suggested in his charge that there were other alternatives, that you needn't resort to such extreme techniques of making your voice heard. I take it you don't think that was the case.
Well, I think you have to link it to the imminence of this threat. The fact that Robert Aldridge and people of his knowledge and understanding say that there are maybe 2 or 3 years to turn this thing around before the technology has run away with it, and before our early warning systems are completely put on launch on warning type and computerized, totally computerized warning systems, so that it's almost inevitable at some point that a war will break out. the paranoia on both sides that in a crisis the weapons are all set and launched on a warning, the possibility that the warning system itself could go wrong, and the fact that it's on a 2 or 3 minute alert system and where the things go up so fast. So, combining all these together and realizing that this is the kind of technology that's going to be in place in the 80s, once those things are in place, and once you have the other kinds of weapons like the cruise missile and the other weapons that are very, very difficult to trace and very, very difficult to and capture in any kind of a nuclear agreement between, any kind of an arms control agreement, just simply because they can't be easily counted and found. You're dealing with a runaway technology that is beyond control. Now, what we're talking about is a democratic system that is, first off, absolutely and necessarily based on information. If the American public understood what this threat means, I think people would be out in the streets and up in arms. But they certainly don't have. Up in arms is a bad term to use. But would be certainly objecting and protesting this. But I think the other thing we were trying to point to in the courtroom is the secrecy and the way that limits people's knowledge of this, so that the democratic system doesn't work. And you have even employees of a GE factory who are designing the tools for these things, who deny that they know what they do, who deny that they know they're nuclear warheads and that they contain 25 to 30 Hiroshimas in each of these little nose cones. And if they don't know it, what does the general public know about this? We've tried in every way we know how, peaceful protests, letter writing, articles, doing a wide variety of things to reach the American public. But there's, I think, in some sense, a conspiracy of silence on this. And the other part of it is that the public is extremely frightened of thinking of these kinds of things, so that it's very hard to get all this into the public consciousness in an effective way so that you can make democracy work.
There was some mention made in...
I'm rattling on. Sure.
I'm getting a real hot spot off that wall.
What does that mean? Should we move? Are we
No,
in imminent danger? Okay.
No.
Scorched?
No, I'm getting a reflection off of the sun.
I see. Is that better?
And it's glaring real bad behind your head. It's going to look kind of weird, Tom. Flip-flopping. I think it'll be all right.
No, he's a versatile person.
I can sit anywhere. In court, out of court.
Okay.
You also mentioned in court a number of times, you and the other defendants, that you wanted to plead an obligation, an individual obligation under international law. I wonder if you'd explain two things. First of all, how you see that obligation, and what in the world does a mother have to do with international law?
Well, I think there's two parts of the international law obligation. One is the Nuremberg Principles, which made clear after World War II that German citizens who understood and knew what was going on had a moral responsibility, even though the courts and the government and the corporations in Germany were never interfered with by the German government. Were never, none of that production of gas ovens was ever stopped legally in Nazi Germany. And we think we have an analogous situation here, that we're building weapons of genocide, and that they violate international law that has tried over a course of 120 years to limit the effects of weaponry and the effects of war strategies and war capabilities to limit the effects on civilians, to say that there are some weapons that shouldn't be used because they poison, or because they can't be controlled to the theater of war and cause, a large number of civilian casualties. And there's been, just a series of agreements, from the Kellogg-Briand Pact and the Hague Conventions and going back to the St. Petersburg agreements back in the 1800s, all of these trying to limit of the technology of weapons on the conduct of war, and also to limit the aggressive acts of nations, so that there's a clear international violation of building and using first strike weapons would be a clear violation of international law. So what we're saying is it makes no sense to have any of these attempts to limit international conduct of war or weaponry if you exclude nuclear weapons from all of this. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate weapon. They're the total weapon. And there's absolutely no way to limit civilian casualties. Civilians are the major casualties of a nuclear war. There's no way to limit it to a small number of soldiers. So you may as well not have any international law at all if you don't include nuclear weapons. And then, so what does an individual citizen do who understands this, who has a sense of it, and who realizes that it's going to kill your children? It's going to take away any hope that your grandchildren might be born, live and grow up a normal life. That at that point, you're talking about, I think, a responsibility as a citizen, a responsibility as a parent, to act, to say no to all this. So there I was.
How did you ever come to that point of recognition, Molly? Tell us a little bit about your background, the development of your roots and the development of your thinking, which clearly is not mirrored by that of a larger society.
I didn't start out a pacifist. I wasn't particularly disturbed when my brother joined the paratroopers back in the 50s. I do recall in the 60s when my younger brother, Eddie, was drafted and sent to Vietnam, that really triggered an awareness in me. I was opposed to the build-up in Vietnam and the conduct of the war there. And then my brother was sent there, and that's when I really started marching and protesting the war. I was really only looking at the war, though, not particularly as a pacifist, although I'd been very strongly influenced by Martin Luther King's nonviolent ideas and been part of the civil rights movement. I'm not sure it had completely gotten into my consciousness to look at the whole question of war and look at the whole question of nuclear arms. I probably still had some ideas that we needed them for defense and hoped they'd never be used. I suppose working at the Merton Center over the last 8 years has certainly been a concrete shift in my own consciousness and my own development. And then working on the B-1 bomber, when Rockwell was involved in that, was a period in which I learned a lot about international law and how the B-1 bomber would violate international law. And so I think at that point I began to put together the whole question of nuclear weapons and ask myself, even about the deterrent policies that are really not different in kind from the first strike policies. I mean, it's been a gradual development of technology within the framework of this is deterrence to the point where we're at a first strike policy. There's no great shift or jump in that development. And so I came to see that what we're talking about really all along was something I should have looked at in terms of my Christian conscience and asked if at any point as a Christian I should have allowed the thought of, even for defense, threatening the lives of innocent people in the Soviet Union or anywhere else.
Maybe you should explain what the Thomas Merton Center is and your involvement with it.
Well, sure. It's a Ministry for Justice and Peace in Pittsburgh, independently funded and ecumenical, and run pretty much, I think, on the principles that Merton wrote a lot about as a Trappist monk, which was, I think, concern for prayer and contemplation as the basis for looking at the world. And he wrote a great deal about racism, about nonviolence, about the nuclear arms race, and was an early critic of the Vietnam War. And very influential, I think, in Catholic thought in terms of nonviolence and pacifism and the war syndrome. The Merton Center is just people, and I've helped to get it started, and then for 8 years I've been director.
You come from an unusual family, an unusual community, something that has made you particularly conscientious, do you think?
I'm not sure about that. I have 7 younger brothers and sisters, and we range a wide span from most of my sisters are housewives. I guess all of them are except for Mary Catherine. That's 3. And my 4 brothers range from vice president of a bank to one who runs a small business to another who's a truck driver and another who works on elevators. So, just kind of a normal family in that regard. My husband is a mechanical designer, draftsman. My kids like sports, and my husband, as an avocation, has softball. So I don't think I'm tremendously different from a lot of people in terms of my life. In terms of consciousness, it's hard to say. Maybe I've had the benefit of some experiences that other people haven't been through. I, as a kid, had to live on welfare and yet came from a family that on the mother's side had money, so I sort of got to see both sides, and that was probably an opportunity that was helpful in my understanding.
Well, as I'm talking to you now, the jury is deliberating about what kind of a verdict to bring on these actions. What are some of the thoughts that you have, some of the feelings that you have? What do you expect? What are you afraid of? What do you anticipate?
Well, I feel like it's out of our hands now. I'm feeling really very calm and peaceful about the whole thing. And if they find us guilty, they find us guilty. I think it would be a very hopeful thing, though, if there were one juror, or maybe a few, who would hold out for life, as one of the people vigiling across the street put it, that maybe that's happening in there. But whatever happens.
Well, at the beginning of the defense's at the beginning of the defense's time to present its case, 2 defendants did testify and explain the reasons for the action at King of Prussia. After that, the remainder of you were silent. Can you explain that, why you did that?
Well, I think it came out of 2 things. The first thing was the decision by the judge not to hear expert witnesses, and in fact not even to consider a brief on justification and the other brief that explained the reasons for these expert witnesses. He went back in his chambers after promising that we would be able to argue this in open court, and came out 15, 20 minutes later and said, well, I've decided, and you can't have the expert witnesses and you can't argue it in open court. At that point, we felt that was a very critical moment in the trial. It was really a turning point, because we had hoped up until then to be able to present a justification argument. And then
Sure. There's a question. The jury has asked 3 questions, and you want to tell them they're also citing Mike Shields.
You want to tell us real quick?
Mike?
Yeah, I'll go down.
Who is?
I better go check on this.
Mike? Okay.
You think they'll let the press in?